Welcome everyone to the latest installment of CADCA's Research into Action webinar series. I'm Carolina Duth and I'm a member of CADCA's Evaluation and Research team. If you haven't previously participated in one of our Research into Action webinars, the purpose of this webinar series is to introduce coalition members and substance misuse preventionists to current and relevant research being conducted in the substance use and community coalition fields. I'm joined for this installment by Dr. Alisa Padon, who will discuss marketing alcohol and vapor products to youth. She is the author of 3 studies, Alcohol Brand Use of Youth Appealing Advertising and Consumption by Youth and Adults, published in Journal of Public Health Research in 2018, Youth Targeted E-Cigarette Marketing in the US, published in the journal Tobacco Regulatory Science in 2017, and a randomized trial of the effect of youth appealing e-cigarette advertising on the susceptibility to use e-cigarettes among youth, published in the journal Nicotine Tobacco Research in 2017. If anyone is interested in reading these articles, I'll be distributing electronic copies following the webinar. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Padon. Alisa Padon is a research scientist at the Public Health Institute. Her research focuses on the impact of policies and marketing of alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, and sugar-sweetened beverages on public health and youth, examining the intersection between unique vulnerabilities of youth and the psychosocial and neurocognitive appeals and techniques used in marketing. She earned her master's degree in biomedical ethics at the University of Pennsylvania, her doctorate in public health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she completed her postdoctoral work at Annenberg School for Communication Tobacco Center of Regulatory Science at the University of Pennsylvania. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Padon to offer her presentation.
Hi, everyone. I am very pleased to get to talk to you today about some of the work I've done on the marketing of alcohol and vapor products and its impact on youth. This is probably information many of you know, but alcohol is still, despite an encouraging national downward trend, the most commonly consumed substance by youth. Half of 15-year-olds report having tried alcohol, and by age 18, that proportion reaches 80%. That's 1 million youth under age 15 starting drinking every year, and that early age of initiation is associated with increased likelihood of becoming alcohol dependent later in life. In the short term, drinking is linked to greater incidence of STIs and sexual assault, injuries, and motor vehicle accidents. And in the long term, heavy drinking during adolescence, when the brain is still developing, can permanently impair memory and executive functioning. Excessive alcohol use is responsible for over 4,300 youth deaths every year, and the cost to society is about $24 billion annually. Now, whereas we had been seeing historic lows in the use of traditional tobacco cigarettes by youth, in 2018, it dipped to about 3% of 12 to 17-year-olds and 21% of 18 to 25-year-olds. It is an entirely new situation now with vapor products, which are just as addictive and have unknown but potentially serious health effects. We saw use of e-cigarettes go from 1.5% in 2011 to 16% in 2015. That's an over 900% increase, and the problem is continuing to get worse. 35% of 12th graders, 31% of 10th graders, and 17% of 8th graders reported using nicotine-containing vapor products in 2018. And this is especially problematic for young adults, those aged 18 to 22. Vaping doubled for college students in just a year, from 2017 to 2018. Now, the vaping epidemic is troubling. These vapor products came on the market as a potentially promising and healthier alternative to traditional tobacco cigarettes. But the vaping epidemic occurring is challenging that assumption. The most recent estimates we have are that over 2,500 people have been hospitalized and 55 people have died. The majority of these cases are among those under age 24, and 16% are under age 18. It's still unclear exactly what the cause and mechanism of use of these vaping devices and lung disease is, but both cannabis-containing and nicotine-containing products have been implicated. So, these delightful products all have huge marketing presences, and that's only increasing. Adolescent exposure to alcohol ads increased 71% in 8 years over a similar period of time in which TV ad expenditures increased by 150%. TV ad spend alone was $8 billion over those years. This translated to youth seeing about 1 alcohol ad per day in 2009. Then there was a 256% increase in vapor product ad exposure among youth in just 2 years. By 2016, 80% of teens nationally reported seeing e-cigarette advertising. And just traditional tobacco ad expenditures in 2019 globally was $9.4 billion. And that doesn't even include e-cigarettes because vapor companies aren't yet required to report their advertising expenditures to the FTC. So there's this phenomena in media effects research called the third person effect, which is when you ask someone if marketing affects them, they say, oh no, it doesn't affect me, but it affects other people. So just to explain a bit about how advertising really does affect us all, we learn by observing others and modeling behaviors we see are successful, but marketers can exploit and take advantage of that vulnerability. Now, media modeling is the use of similar or attractive looking individuals in ads, modeling all these wonderful things that can happen if you consume a certain product. And when you're exposed to that modeling over and over, like you see the same ad every commercial break, you are more likely to believe in its realism. And this is especially true if you're an adolescent with little, as of yet, personal experience with those products to compare to the media portrayals you're being exposed to. And we know it works. Teen exposure to alcohol and tobacco ads is associated with youth starting to use the products, using them more and more frequently, and having more positive attitudes and perceptions toward the products than those teens with less exposure to tobacco and alcohol advertising. And really the smoking gun here is the industry wouldn't spend the money they do on advertising if it didn't work. So we wanted to evaluate alcohol ads' effect on youth, looking at content. And we had to first ask, well, what exact content is appealing to youth? Second, how much of this content is out there in alcohol ads? Third, we wanted to know, are certain brands or alcohol types worse offenders in terms of using this kind of content? And finally, are there differences in how the content appeals to youth versus adults? In other words, is this content and are these ads that are just appealing to everyone? So to answer the first question of what content is appealing to youth, we did a systematic literature review, mostly of alcohol marketing studies, but also some tobacco and food and beverage marketing studies with youth, to compile advertising content features that appeal to youth. We call this the Content Appealing to Youth, or K index. And we found that this content falls broadly into the following 6 categories. So production value refers to structural or stylistic features of the ads, like number of edits, quick camera cuts, the use of animation and sound saturation, sound effects and music. So these features can elicit an involuntary cognitive engagement with the ad. Like your eyes are drawn to the screen without you even really realizing it. And maybe those of you with young children like myself have experienced watching a boring adult show, which my kids have zero interest in, and suddenly they're glued to the screen as soon as an ad comes on. That ability to look away is less developed in children. Themes that are youth-oriented include using magic, fantasy, and humor. And then character appeal is the use of attractive, famous, or similar-looking actors, which can trigger that modeling tendency, as well as the use of animals or cartoons, which are appealing to a younger youth audience. Product appeals refer to messages like product taste, ingredients, calories, etc. And in alcohol ads have been reported to be disliked by youth. They don't like being told that beer tastes good because they don't think it does, and that's not why they're drinking it anyway. With e-cigarettes, of course, we're seeing things like vanilla cupcake vapor flavor, 0 calories and 50 servings. Rewarding appeals are things like positive emotions, happiness, social achievement, life achievement, social success, etc. Outcomes that are particularly appealing to our socially anxious teens. You see here a bunch of very young-looking girls playing flip cup, but it's an ad for Burnett's vodka. So I'm assuming that's vodka in those blue cups there, which is a terrible idea. And then there's risky content, which includes depictions of overconsumption, that might be drinking games, addiction, which can take the form of showing drinking in the morning or providing excuses for drinking, like the tagline, "It's 5 o'clock somewhere," and injury, which for alcohol usually looks like adventure, showing boating or skiing or biking along with drinking. You can see this ad here for a vape pen along with a weapon. These kind of appeals are theorized to be liked by youth, given teens risk-taking and sensation-seeking behaviors. So, armed with this index, to answer our second question about how much alcohol ads are using content with appeal to youth, we used the index to code a sample of alcohol ads that appeared on TV shows most popular among youth. The bars here represent each content element that was coded for. There are about 40 of them total. The y-axis there on the left is the number of times each content element showed up in the full sample. So on the left here are the production value effects, fast edits and sound saturation. The next ones are character appeal. We didn't see a ton of that, but that's that use of like animals and celebrities. These are product appeals. They were fairly prevalent. And then we saw rewarding appeals. That highest one there is the use of depictions of positive emotions. And the next one was social and life success. And then the final one there is risky content. So there's obviously a lot of content appealing to youth out there, but is it having an effect? We use multivariate linear regression to answer our remaining questions about whether the use of content appealing to youth, or K, by alcohol brands is correlated with alcohol brand preferences by youth and adults. So I'll go through and explain our measures here one at a time, starting with brand K score. So this was created using that TV ad coded data that I just talked about. Each K feature in an ad was scored as absent, partially present, or fully present, or sometimes just absent or present depending on the feature. So for instance, were there celebrities? Yes or no. But was there animation? Well, sometimes the whole ad was animated, sometimes none of it was, sometimes some of it was. So that was a none, partial, or fully present. Then all those feature scores within an ad were summed into a single ad K score. So the higher the score, the more youth appealing features were present. And then the scores for all ads for a single brand, like all Bud Light ads, were then averaged into a single brand K score. The next variable is youth alcohol brand consumption, which we pulled from the A brand survey. This is a survey we conducted in 2012 to get a measure of youth consumption by alcohol brand. It was the first to comprehensively examine self-reported consumption among 13 to 20-year-olds of nearly 900 different alcohol brands. And we found that underage drinking is highly concentrated among just 26 of those brands, leading us to wonder what those brands might be doing differently in their marketing to maintain such a large youth market share. Those 26 brands we termed the popular alcohol brands, and the rest were the less popular alcohol brands. So our outcome of youth consumption was a continuous variable that represented percent of the youth in the A brand sample who reported consuming each brand, and that ranged from 0 to 28%. Our next one was adult alcohol brand consumption, which we got from GfK's MRI survey of the American consumer. So this survey captures data from about 13,000 adults. Those are age 18 plus on their consumption of various consumer products, including about 320 brands of alcohol. So our adult alcohol consumption was the percent of this survey sample who reported consuming each brand. And then finally, we created a measure of youth relative to adult consumption. So for instance, if youth consumption of Jack Daniels was 20%, meaning 20% of the A brand youth reported consuming Jack Daniels, and adult consumption was 10%, the ratio measure would be 20 divided by 10, or 2, indicating the proportion of youth consuming the brand was 2 times larger than the proportion of adults. So we use this in an effort to get at the relative effectiveness of advertising on youth versus adults. So we first ran tests separately for those 26 popular and the other less popular brands among youth, and what we found was that brands popular among youth use significantly more K features. And then looking at the use of K by alcohol type, it wasn't surprising to see that wine, which is the type most popular among those age 50 plus, used significantly fewer K features. Then we drilled down. We next look at whether this content equally appeals to youth and adults. And we found a positive association between youth consumption and the use of K by brands. So as brands used more content appealing to youth features, youth preference for those brands went up. And between the youth and adult ratio of consumption and use of K by brand on the right graph there, meaning youth were more likely than adults to report drinking brands that used more K features. And even more telling, we found a negative association between adult brand consumption and those brands' use of K features. So the reason this is important to look at the adult versus youth separately is the alcohol industry has maintained youth are simply mimicking the drinking patterns of adults and drinking what's in their parents' liquor cabinet. But what this suggests is that even when kids and adults are drinking the same brand, if those brands use more K features, kids drink them disproportionately more. In other words, marketing does play a role, and there's more to this story than kids mimicking adults. So after we completed this first set of studies with alcohol advertising, we became interested in the application of the K index to other substances like vapor products. We wanted to know first whether and how frequently those K features we had found rampant in alcohol ads were associated with underage drinking were appearing in ads for what at the time in 2015 when we started this was a fairly new product trying to gain market share. And then second, we wanted to actually test the effectiveness of youth exposure to some of those features in ads for vaping products. So like with the alcohol study, we gathered a sample of e-cigarette ads and coded their content for the presence of content appealing to youth using the K index. We did have to make some changes to the index. For instance, we took out the risky content related to adventure because vapor products don't impair users like alcohol does. That would then make use while adventuring, biking, boating risky. We also had to add some features. So for instance, we added a competitive appeal. A lot of e-cigarette ads marketed themselves as being better than tobacco cigarettes and different. So there were a few changes, but otherwise it was largely the same. And then we conducted a randomized controlled experiment to test the effectiveness of that content on youth. So we gathered and coded 154 e-cigarette ads from two sources. One, Stanford has this online database, their center called the Research into the Impact of Tobacco Advertising. The center studies the promotional activities of the tobacco industry, and they have this really valuable online repository of tobacco product ads. So we used that, and then we also gathered televised e-cig ads from local and national broadcasts. And we found, again, significant use of K features in e-cigarette ads with a slightly different distribution to alcohol. So on the left there, you can see 12% featured appealing characters like celebrities and cartoon characters. The most common one was product appeals. Almost 40% used these. So that would be like the ad telling you how to use an e-cigarette, what's inside of it, etc. Which again, youth reported not liking in alcohol ads, that kind of product appeal. 30% used those production value stylistic elements. 28% used rewarding appeals like showing friendship and romance, and then just 7% used youth-oriented themes like magic or humor. So next we designed this randomized controlled trial in order to test the effectiveness of those different kinds of ads on youth susceptibility to initiating e-cigarette use and holding positive e-cigarette beliefs. So we used an online panel. We recruited 417 non-smoking youth. They were aged 10 to 17. And then we sorted the e-cigarette ads by how many youth appealing features they contained. That was that ad K score. We took the 10 ads with the highest K scores for the high youth appeal condition, the 10 ads with the lowest K scores for the low youth appeal condition. Then we also had a control condition. We pulled ads that were aired on TV during the same time period that the e-cig ads were aired. We limited the sample to food and beverage items as they tend to appeal to very large market segments. We excluded items that had purported health benefits like vitamins. We didn't want to be comparing what might be a health product versus a clearly non-health product. And then our final sample, we randomly selected 10 from. They were generally soft drinks, fast food restaurants, snacks, candy, that sort of thing. So we randomly assigned participants to view either control ads, high K-scoring e-cig ads, or low K-scoring e-cig ads. And then we asked them to answer questions about, among other things, whether they liked the ads, whether they intended to use tobacco products in the future, and whether they had positive or negative beliefs about e-cigarettes. They also completed what's called an implicit association task, which measures unconscious or hidden associations towards smoking and vaping products, and a time-pressured product selection task, which I'm going to show you what it looked like. So in this task, participants were asked, if you were to get a coupon to purchase one of these products, which one would you choose? You have 10 seconds to make your choice. Please make your choice before the timer reaches 0. And then we showed them this matrix of products, including vapor products, food and snack products reflective of the control ads, and a pack of traditional cigarettes. And then we had this timer counting down from 10. And as it reached 3, 2, 1, it would flash on the screen in red. So adding this time pressure puts limits on the amount of information that can be processed during consumer decision making. And when processing resources are limited, more hidden feelings and desires rather than kind of rational processing can drive consumer decisions. We also know there's a stigma attached to using tobacco products. Youth are less likely to report if they actually have used them, if they're interested in using them, because they know that's not what adults want to hear. And so getting at these kind of unconscious or implicit associations is a way to kind of get around that stigma and get at perhaps more true real world attitudes about it. So what we found was that compared to those adolescents shown control ads, youth shown any kind of e-cigarette ad were more likely to select an e-cig product in the timed choice task and have more positive beliefs about e-cigarettes, like that they're high tech, that they're helpful socially, and they're enjoyable. Surprisingly to us, compared to control, it was youth exposed to these low K-scoring e-cigarette ads that were more likely to report susceptibility or interest in trying e-cigs and combustible traditional tobacco products in the future. There was no significant difference in susceptibility comparing control and the high K ad condition. So we were very curious about this. And what we speculate is that the features that were most prevalent in those low youth appeal ads were educational, like how to use e-cigarettes, how they are different from tobacco cigarettes. Now, this may in fact be valuable information to a non-smoking teenager, imagining they may one day be offered a vape in front of their peers. And it's borne out in that a common reason these youth gave for liking a low appeal ad was the information it provided. It's consistent too with other studies that found that never smoking youth rated informational e-cigarette ads highly. So in marketing a product that is new and unfamiliar, rational appeals may be more effective than emotional appeals. But it's an effect that we would expect to diminish as the product becomes more familiar. And in that case, then lifestyle appeals would be more persuasive. And though we haven't studied this, when you look at just the advertising history that Juul has used from early on when they were trying to get market share to later when they were arguably very targeting teens, this is what you see. They switched over to a lifestyle appeal. And we found no significant differences between control and either e-cig conditions on the implicit association task. So what does it mean? What can we do? The First Amendment, unfortunately, makes restricting corporate speech like advertising really tricky. And you really can't restrict marketing for a single product that's legally sold. And we don't have tobacco marketing because of the Master Settlement Agreement, but we have no such corollary for alcohol. Now, the alcohol industry marketing is self-regulated, but we can advocate for changes to their industry guidelines to include more of those K features we found were related to youth brand preferences. Public campaigns identifying those brands that are the worst offenders of using youth appealing content could create pressure for them to update their guidelines. So that's more of a communication campaign approach. In terms of policy, local jurisdictions and states can restrict advertising if it's across products for aesthetic or security reasons. So for instance, they can ban billboards entirely They can mandate that store windows can't be covered in advertising or can't have more than a certain amount. Government also has control over advertising on public property or government-owned property like buses and bus shelters. But again, those restrictions would have to apply to all products. But a lot of places have decided to do this. Wouldn't it be nice if there were no billboards on the highway? You can require there be a certain distance between outdoor ads and schools. And that's because you can do that for specific products if it is illegal for kids to use those products. So it kind of hinges on illegality. But there have been challenges to this too. So for instance, you can't require the buffer be too far from schools because then the industry can argue it is impeding their ability to communicate with adults. New media is another area where youth are definitely being overexposed to ads, and regulating the internet is hard. It's hard to know who is getting targeted, where, and how. But there has been some progress in petitioning the media platforms themselves, like Facebook and Snapchat, to do better age gating of alcohol content. So you don't see it there. That means, they know what age kids are, and they make sure that certain things don't pop up in their feed. One option that's been considered is to tax advertising, which is an interesting possibility, or to require warning labels on advertising. That's something that's currently being attempted for sugar-sweetened beverage ads in San Francisco right now, so keep an eye on that. The next one doesn't directly reduce advertising, but reducing the number of licensees in a jurisdiction can indirectly reduce advertising. You can require retailers to obtain a local license if you don't have one already or if it's not preempted. In addition to the state license. You can also reduce the number of new alcohol licenses granted. It's really hard to close down existing retailers, but you can not allow the transfer of licenses or giving out of new ones. If your state is a state-run alcohol monopoly and is considering privatizing, encourage them not to. A very recent study showed that in Washington state, which privatized their previously state-run liquor stores a few-ish years ago, found that household monthly purchases of liquor increased 82% after privatization. And one driving reason for that is private industry advertisers. So keep things state-run if possible. Now for e-cigarettes, there are currently no advertising regulations. So anything would be an improvement, but all these same concepts apply. In addition, product restrictions to make them less attractive to youth, like the proposed nationwide flavor ban, making them less easy to hide, less techy, would also make a big difference. You can't advertise those flavors if they are not available to sell. So, and there is some other innovative stuff and end game strategies happening in tobacco, like in Beverly Hills, which in June of last year voted to ban most tobacco sales starting in 2021. And then while policy level interventions are our primary focus for change, there is also still a need for increased media literacy for youth as well as for parents, and an opportunity for healthcare providers, educators, community members, and coalitions to provide that training to increase youth skepticism toward ads, help them to understand what is unrealistic about advertising, what corporations are after, and how that industry takes advantage of the unique vulnerabilities of youth to create the next generation of addicts. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the question and answer session. That'll be on the next slide, Dr. Padon. Great, so first, CADCA will ask Dr. Padon several questions, and then we'll turn it over to participants to ask their own questions. So if you have a question for the presenter about her research, please go ahead and type it in the question and answer box, not in the chat box. And the question and answer box is that box with a Q on it. Looks like there's one question in there right now. So if everyone else can go ahead and start putting things in there, that'll be great. And I'll start it off with the questions from CADCA. So the first question, you discussed the K index in your presentation, but could you tell us more about some features in advertising that tend to appeal to adults and not to youth? And are there any areas of overlap in terms of what kind of features in advertising appeal to adults and youth?
Yeah, this is a really good question for some of the reasons I talked about. We haven't yet done a similar kind of systematic review of what content appeals to adults, or really drill down into which of those youth appealing features may also have appeal for adults as much as we'd like. I would love to do this kind of work. One thing we did do is called an exploratory factor analysis, which is where we kind of look at different groupings of the features and examine their relationships with the drinking outcomes, both youth and adults. And we did find that the alcohol product appeals were more closely correlated with adult preferences. So adults seem to like being told, you know, what's in their beer, vodka, where it was grown, how many calories it has, etc. And then one surprise from that analysis was that sex in content was actually more closely associated with adult and not youth preferences. So we weren't expecting that, but it was. But I do think that there are a number of these features, even just in the K index, that probably appeal to adults as well. But one of the problems is youth are simply more susceptible to believing in their realism and acting accordingly, whereas adults know that, you know, drinking the right beer at the bar isn't gonna automatically get you the girl, right? Or result in an impromptu toast among best friends. Like, we know that's not real life, but kids don't. So that content, even if it's appealing to both, works better on them.
All right, second question. Did you notice any differences in the ads you reviewed for alcohol brands and vaping brands in terms of what types of content appealing to youth they used?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this would probably be different if we redid the e-cigarette ad analysis today. But the most common appeals used in alcohol ads were those rewarding features. I mean, you rarely see an ad. Sometimes you see ads for like craft beer with the product appeals and all that, but it's usually parties, it's sophistication, it's friends out at a bar, it's these emotional appeals. You know, alcohol will make you happy and make you rich and all that stuff. And it's much less frequently, not never, but it's less frequently about, you know, what's in it. There's obviously a subset of adults that, you know, like the craft beer and all that stuff. So those are out there. But for the e-cig ads, we saw way fewer of those lifestyle appeals using e-cigs in social situations. It was much more about the product appeals, the informational things. And at first we thought, oh, good, you know, well, kids don't like these informational, this information in alcohol ads, thus, you know, informational e-cig ads is going to be not appealing to adults, but will just target traditional tobacco smokers for whom vapor products might be a cessation device. But then, in fact, that is not what we found. And other studies, you know, have supported this as well, that teens, at least back then, were really interested in how to use an e-cig and what was different about it. And I think the reality is because vapor products came on the market as like a healthy product, like a healthier alternative, and they had all these great flavors and stuff, that kids saw them that way. They didn't have the stigma that traditional tobacco cigarettes had, and they, you know, kind of were this cool, healthy product. And so information about them was desired by youth. So that was that surprising finding. And again, I think it might be different now. We might see more similarities between alcohol and vapor product ads now, but I would love to do that analysis. Haven't done it yet.
So to jump back to the K index, and I'm going to do a question from the audience now. Evie wants to know if the K index is publicly available or if it's proprietary.
No, it is definitely publicly available. There's another paper that I published before the sort of the very first one of this set, and I can provide it to Carolina as well, that showed the initial content analysis of alcohol ads, and at the end of that paper, the alcohol relevant K index is there. Again, there's some changes in it for tobacco, and right now I can't remember. I think we have it like noted as available upon request, so I'm happy to send that one too. There's some other studies I actually did with Instagram ads, which weren't moving, they were still images. So we made a modified version to capture still image appeal, and then we have a generic version as well. So there's lots of versions. I'm happy to share whatever, if anyone's interested in seeing them, happy to share anything.
Yeah, that would be great. I think more people than just Evie would be kind of interested in seeing this.
Great. Yeah.
And let's see. I'm just going to do another one of these. Oh. Pamela wants to know, can you use what you learned about what is attractive to youth to develop social marketing ads to reduce the use of e-cigarettes among youth?
Yeah, I love this question. Yeah, I think so, because at the end of the day, these are just features that work for youth. I mean, yes, some of them have specific relevance for alcohol, but I've actually shared the index with some groups who were thinking of doing just that, not just social media, but public service announcements and other communication campaigns to say, don't, whatever the communication message is. I think that these are really just sort of standard appeals used in marketing that seem to work for youth. So I would love to see that done. I think there would need to be some changes to it. Obviously, you can't use all the features, but yeah, that's an application that some people are considering right now.
Great. I'm going to do this last question in here that is from the audience. So participants, please put more questions if you have them. And then I'll go back to the remaining 2 questions from CADCA. So Lindsay wants to know, can you comment on the link, if there is one, or research on the link between youth e-cigarette use and youth alcohol use?
I'm not familiar with that research, actually. I'm sure there is some co-use that happens. I mean, I'm not sure, but I would guess that there is co-use that happens.
Yeah, let me jump in here, actually. Lindsay, we did a webinar in October. If you go and look on the CADCA website in the resources page, that was kind of about how youth, if they use one substance, they're more susceptible to use other substances. And I don't remember if e-cigarettes was specifically mentioned, but I do know that alcohol use and marijuana use and tobacco use were all part of this study. So you might want to listen to that webinar and see if that will give you an answer to your question.
Yeah, I would guess, there's some things about the youth brain during adolescence, which include like that risk-taking and sensation-seeking tendencies that I could see applying to both substances. And just because you're using one, doesn't mean you wouldn't use another. So I could see that.
Okay, let's jump back to the questions from CADCA for a minute here. So my third question is more about what policies would be most effective. And you did talk about this quite a bit at the end of your presentation, so maybe if you have anything to add. You mentioned in your article and in this presentation that alcohol companies follow industry recommendations regarding youth appealing advertising. If the FDA was drafting a policy, or perhaps if a local community was drafting a policy regarding content appealing to youth in advertising for alcohol and also for vapor, what would you recommend be included in the regulations? And then how can community coalitions address alcohol, vaping, and in some states, marijuana advertising that appeals to youth?
Yeah. So my work right now, and this ties a little bit into the last question too, is focused on cannabis. I'm just I do all the substances. But so we've been working on a stronger definition of content appealing to youth to apply to cannabis regulations in California and beyond. And it's got 4 parts. The first part would be very broadly, no advertising that for alcohol or tobacco that mimics advertising of a non-alcohol or tobacco consumer product typically consumed by or marketed to children or youth. So this is kind of a broad catch-all to avoid ads that look like kids' cereal ads or superhero adventures, etc. So like when you ask these teenagers, which we did in some focus groups, you know, we showed them some ads, like, who do you think these ads are targeting? They could say that one's targeting teenagers versus that one's targeting adults. And that's coming from this place where there's a clear type of children's entertainment and youth entertainment that these ads are tapping into, and kids recognize it, and I'm quite sure the industry recognizes it. So making sure that kind of standard for how you entertain kids isn't present in tobacco and alcohol ads is one, but that's still, like, the important thing is to have really concrete, discrete examples of what content is appealing to youth. That's what we wanted to get at. I mean, the alcohol industry ads now, the industry standards now are just like, don't have ads that appeal to youth. But who knows what that means? I mean, this was a dissertation on what appeals to youth, so it's a big question. So part 2 of that is no depictions of cartoons or any non-human animate creatures like animals, insects, toys, robots, candy or other devices typically used in marketing to youth or that kids think are youth products. The third one would be no use of actors or human characters who appear to be under age 18. That tries to get at this modeling element. There's lots of very attractive, youthful looking models in these ads that kids go, well, I want to look like that. That looks like me. And then finally, don't include celebrities who specifically appeal to youth. And that's actually not a hard metric to find. So those are some really concrete like regulatory facing recommendations that we've made for cannabis that could apply to alcohol and tobacco vapor products as well. Yeah, and then I did sort of talk about how can community coalitions address these advertising. I mean, again, unfortunately, like, it is very hard to regulate the marketing of alcohol. Vapor products, however, and cannabis products, there's a need for public comment and for coalition movement. Figure out the ask, find a sympathetic sponsor, and get the PTA involved. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys how to do this. You all know. But I think, like, so in California, for instance, we have been going to all of these state and local meetings on cannabis regulation, and we were able to go in there and say, hey, in terms of marketing, here's what we know from alcohol. For instance, they use this 71.2% audience composition cutoff. That means any ad for alcohol this is in the industry guidelines, any ad for alcohol on TV has to be shown to, or on a show where the audience is 71% adults. But we know from alcohol advertising that it doesn't work. There are, first of all, it's teenagers and specifically that we're worried about. Kids under age like 12 aren't really paying attention to alcohol advertising, so it's really a much smaller sample. The Institute of Medicine recommended an 85% audience threshold. We said that to the state, and they went, okay, that makes sense for cannabis, and the committee accepted it. So I think that armed with research on what we know from alcohol and tobacco and in terms of cannabis and vapor products, I think we can go in and there is room there to have an impact, and do it now because it's going to be really hard to roll back these regulations later once the industry is more firmly entrenched.
Great. So I have there's a question. Here we go. So I'm just going to confirm something with you. Julie is asking if you can share the 26 brands of alcohol which are most used by youth. Those are in your article, right?
What?
Those are in your article, right?
They are, and I actually have that as a slide here. These are the 26 brands. So the number 1 brand is Bud Light with 28% prevalence, and then Ciroc vodka was the lowest one, but still 5% prevalence, which is still quite a bit. And then I also have here the brands that are most popular among adults, the 10 brands. So you see there's definitely some overlap, which is why it was important for us to do that ratio of youth to adult brand preferences.
Okay, great. So let's keep these slides then in the final deck so people can review them
Okay.
at their leisure.
Okay, but you're right, it is also in the article.
Okay, perfect. So we have someone else asking, is there a collection of alcohol and e-cigarette ads that could be used for youth media literacy training?
Definitely. So the best database I know of is the Stanford one. It's Stanford Research into the Impact of Tobacco. Oh, I forget exactly what the acronym is, darn. But they have this online repository of ads. And now I'm thinking, do they have alcohol ads as well? I feel like they might. They definitely have lots of tobacco and vapor products. And they're just all, it's publicly available. They have them sorted into super helpful categories, like ones that mirror the, traditional tobacco advertisements from the 1950s, ones that, show youthful actors, ones that are using a health appeal, et cetera. So you can kind of go through, and depending on, what you want to talk about in health literacy training, you can find a lot there. I would double check to see if they actually have alcohol ads too. It would be great if they did, and I'm sorry, I just can't recall right now if they do.
Ooh, Lisa Goodwin says it's the Stanford University Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. So we can link that as a resource on the CADCA website for everyone that's
and specifically it's SRITA, SRITA is where you find the online repository. But yeah, perfect.
And then another quick, just a comment from Kathleen. She said that One Coalition's youth organized a group that asked a store owner to remove a billboard based on data on the harmful effects of alcohol on youth. And the store owner actually did remove the billboard. So well done,
Yay!
Coalition. And that gives
Good
hope
work.
to everyone else that just
one billboard at a time.
Yep. Okay. More questions. You guys really stepped up and put some questions in here. So there's some good ones. So another one from Evie. What, if anything, did you find about the link between ads with high K scores and the placement and timing of those ads? Social media platforms and TV channels popular with youth, placed at a time where youth were likely to interact with the ad, etc.
So we have this for the alcohol and e-cigarette ads. The way we selected the alcohol ads was to go, okay, from Nielsen market data, what were I think it was 20 most popular TV shows among the age demographic we were interested in, which was 13 to 20 for alcohol, during that year. And so then we went to data from those ads and pulled out any data from those shows and pulled out any alcohol ads that aired during those shows. So I think your question is good about timing and placement. There's been a lot of discussion and research done on, if you place ads during certain times of the day. I'm not sure if this is actually getting at your question or not, but it reminded me of the ad placement question is a good one. These are ones that had the highest youth audiences. And I don't know, that I would guess that means something like they were airing between 7 and 9 p.m., on a weekend. I'm not sure. But they were the ones that got the highest youth audiences for alcohol. And then we did the same thing for e-cigarette ads. We just looked at, popular shows and pulled ads from it. Actually, I can tell you The Daily Show was one of them that was really popular among youth, and that is a later one. And that's part of the problem. I think people have argued in terms of placement, they used to say, we'll put them on late night TV, but more and more kids have TVs in their room these days. And so teenagers will turn on. They are actually watching that later TV that we used to think was sort of safe to air alcohol ads on. And it turns out it's not. Does that answer the question? Is there more to it that I missed?
No, I think that's good. Sorry, just noting down an email address real quick here. Okay. What else do we have? Several people have posted in the question and answer box the Stanford resource that was just mentioned.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So if people want to look in the question and answer box, I think you can view all the questions that are there. You can click on that link. All right. An anonymous attendee asks, in the wake of the federal Tobacco 21 law, what recommendations do you have for ways to redirect local decision makers to policies like a local tobacco retail license that would be a great solution to the issue of nicotine product marketing that targets youth? Local decision makers think this is a moot point now because they view Tobacco 21 as a catch-all solution.
Well, it obviously hasn't worked for alcohol. I mean, yeah, that's a really good point. I think it is important to decrease increase the age. But if you look at the impact, like if you're asking, you know, if you have just political will to do one thing, and that would be, you know, do some kind of ban on flavors or certain kind of products versus increase the age, the research is very clear. It is about banning the products or limiting the products. I mean, again, you know, kids find access to anything, anywhere if they want to. But if the products that are really appealing to them just don't exist or are harder to get, then that's the ask, I would say. And there is research on this, and people are continuing to do it. Obviously, vapor products are a newish product. It's a you know, brand new research literature compared to tobacco, which, you know, had got this wonderful stigma attached to it in the minds of adolescents that vapor products don't have, obviously, now. But still, I think that the lessons we learned from, you know, tobacco policy, tobacco control policy in the past, and alcohol control policy are very applicable to vapor products and new and, you know, nicotine-containing products. Restrict the appeal of those products, restrict advertising as much as possible. The age 21 thing is helpful, but it's not enough.
All right. I think we still have time for a few more questions. Let me check. Yes, maybe one or two more. Oh, a lot of people asking for certificates of attendance. Okay, Laura's asking, are there any evidence-informed guidelines for coalitions in developing counter-advertising strategies?
There might be, but I'm not familiar with it, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'm trying to, yeah, sorry. I mean, we know, you know, like the Truth Initiative, their teen smoking campaign is heralded as one of the most effective communication campaigns in public health. And that was, you know, its main thing was like linking, putting in the kids' heads the idea that corporations are taking advantage of them. You know, it's kind of like the snarky Big Brother thing. Like, it was super smart. But any of these campaigns really have to be tailored to the substance, tailored to the age group you're going after. That's not a satisfying answer, I know. There's the Frameworks Institute, which we have talked to a number of times about how you would develop a communications campaign related to cannabis and other drugs. I think that they might also have done some work on alcohol. So that's a place to look. The Frameworks Institute, I think they're based in California, and they've got a number of reports on research they did about what kind of messaging, for instance, works well with youth around, you know, anti-drug use. I think yeah, that might be, that's probably the best source I know of offhand.
All right, thank you. So that, I think, leads right into the final question from CADCA, which is where can interested coalition members find more information about your work, and what other resources can you recommend for coalitions interested in content appealing to youth in advertising as it relates to substance use? And then what we're going to do is take these resources and post them on the CADCA website so everyone will be able to access them after the webinar.
Perfect. So I mentioned before, my work currently is more focused on cannabis retail and marketing and its effects on youth. So I don't have any papers coming out right now that are tobacco or alcohol related, but cannabis has a lot of corollaries. And there are some great centers still doing this work. So obviously I mentioned the Stanford one on tobacco. There's the Center on Alcohol Marketing and Youth, CAMY, C-A-M-Y, at Johns Hopkins. They monitor specifically the marketing practices of the alcohol industry in order to focus attention and action on those practices that jeopardize the health and safety of youth. And then, so the work I'm doing right now around cannabis, we have a website. The project's called Getting It Right from the Start. And there we have some model ordinances for how to regulate retail and marketing for cannabis. And again, very much informed by what we know from alcohol and tobacco control policies. If that's helpful to anyone who is in a state considering legalizing cannabis, or where it's legal, but there's still room for regulatory changes. So I can send the link to that as well. And we have some interesting papers, I think, coming out on the effects of variations in cannabis regulation on youth. Those will all be forthcoming. Yeah, that's about it.
All right, then let's go ahead and move on to a few announcements before we wrap things up. Everyone in the question and answer box who is asking for a letter of attendance, I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So if you can stay on the line, I will tell you exactly how to get one. So first, the next webinar in this series is going to be on February 26th, and Dr. Julia Dilley will present on her article, Community Level Policy Responses to State Marijuana Legalization in Washington State. And she's also going to present some research that she's doing that will soon be published, but hasn't quite passed through all the reviews at the journal yet. It's very close, but it's not published yet. And it's on the same thing, but in Oregon. So if you're interested in what policies communities that have legalized, that have legal marijuana in their state, what policies those communities can implement, this is the webinar for you. So keep an eye out for any emails about this. They'll be coming out in early February. And then if you'd like a letter of participation for this webinar for continuing education or other purposes, which I'm noticing a lot of you do want a letter, so please send me an email at kduth@cadca.org. I'm going to type that in the chat box right now. It's kduth@cadca.org. So if you send an email to that email address and say, I want a letter, I will send it to you. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to distribute the slides and electronic copies of the articles and potentially links to various resources mentioned to everyone who participated following the webinar. So that'll probably be sometime tomorrow because we have to collect all this stuff. And I'm also going to post the recording of the webinar and all these resources on the CADCA website in the next week or so. Next slide, please. So thank you. CADCA would like to thank Dr. Padon for her diligent work in providing such valuable and current information on substance use prevention. And we also thank coalition members who participated in this webinar for their comments and their insights, especially all of you jumping in really quick with that Stanford link. I love that. So it was great to have Dr. Padon on this webinar today, and we're looking forward to the next webinar in February.
Thank you.